Hello, my name is Dr. Sheldon Wittenvile, and today we're going to talk about the neurobiology of substance abuse, or, as I also like to call this, the prefrontal cortex takes on the nucleus accumbens. So here's a cartoon. This guy saying to his mother, there are a lot of things you can do to fill your time, Ma. Have you thought about a hobby or an addiction? So an addiction is one way to fill your time. I'm going to talk about some cases here. First, I'm going to show you 3 cases of people that I actually saw, and I'm going to ask you, if you're in the audience, to guess whether you think these people have a substance abuse problem or not. These are actual cases. This is a guy I saw in San Francisco, happily married stockbroker, making a lot of money, very active in the community. He was active in nonprofit charities. He had a lot of friends. I had his health records. He had no health problems. He had no legal problems. And this guy worked on the San Francisco stock market. He worked on the New York Stock Exchange time, so he was done with work about 2. Every day he'd start drinking right after work, drink the rest of the day into the evening, at least a bottle of vodka a day. So my question for the audience is, do you think this person has a substance abuse problem? Most people would say yes. Case number 2. Here's a man I saw in the San Francisco General Emergency Room. He was a successful artist. He had a girlfriend. He had a lot of friends. He had no health problems. I had his medical records. This guy had broken his leg, and while we were setting it, he said, Doc, you're going to have to give me more morphine than usual. I said, why is that? He said, because every weekend my girlfriend and I, we shoot heroin. We only use clean needles. We only do it once a week. So again, the question, do you think this person has a substance abuse problem? Most people would say yes. Okay, case number 3. This is a woman I saw in rural Kansas. She was a 68-year-old retired librarian, very active in her church, had 4 kids, 9 grandchildren, very friendly. Everybody loved her. And she never drank except once a year on the anniversary of her divorce. She would have 2 beers, and after she would drink the 2 beers, she'd get the shotgun out of the trunk of her car and go around shooting signs. She'd spend the night in the drunk tank and be released the next day. So the question is, do you think this person has a substance abuse problem? And most people, based on this person drinking 2 beers a year, would say probably not. So let's look at some definitions here. The first thing we're really talking about is abuse. That means self-administration of any drug in a culturally disapproved manner that causes adverse consequences. Addiction is the behavior that people use to get the drug. Dependence is the physiological need of the body to have the drug, otherwise it goes through withdrawal. Reinforcement means they have to use the drug to get the pleasure over and over again. Tolerance means you have to take more and more to get the same effect. Cross-tolerance, you can use different drugs that give the same effect and keep people from going through withdrawal. Here's withdrawal, relapse and rebound. But really we're talking about abuse. And again, it's using a drug that causes adverse consequences. That's what substance abuse means. So using a drug or using a substance even though it's causing harm. And with this definition, it doesn't have to be alcohol or illegal drugs or things we normally think of as addictive. It can be other things. For me, it's potato chips. You put this in front of me, or this in front of me, or this, I will eat the whole bag, even though it causes me to break out in pimples and gain weight. So I have a problem with potato chip abuse. Fortunately, they don't make chips actually like this. The New York Reuben chip, I'd probably eat that. And the biscuits and gravy chip looks pretty good too. So people can have trouble with substances even though they're not illegal or normally thought of as addictive. Some people have a problem with ice cream. They don't want to eat it, but they do anyway. It's not good for them. Candy, chocolate, all kinds of sweets. Now sugar is a little bit different than what I'm going to talk about because there is more of a biological drive for sugar than there is for other drugs. But the point is that people can abuse things other than what are normally considered addictive substances. Now, pardon me, looking at these cases, we have to say that these people are substance abusers if they're being harmed by their substance abuse. So here in case number 1, this guy's drinking a bottle of vodka a day, and normally you'd have liver problems, you'd have other probably legal problems, but he didn't at the time that I saw him. So I wanted to tell this guy, you need to stop drinking because look how it's hurting you, but I couldn't find how it was hurting him. So this guy, we cannot say, despite drinking a bottle of vodka a day, we cannot say that this person is a substance abuser. Similarly with case 2, this person's shooting heroin once a week. But what are the problems from it? Normally people would get HIV or hepatitis, all kinds of skin infections, lung infections, all kinds of problems from shooting, usually with dirty needles is the big problem with heroin. But this guy was using clean needles. He didn't have any of those problems. And he wasn't even using it daily. He was just using it once a week. So we couldn't say that this person was abusing heroin or using drugs, in this case heroin, either. But then we have case number 3. This woman is drinking 2 beers a year. She gets arrested every time she drinks. So she does have a substance abuse problem. She could be called an alcoholic, even though she's only drinking 2 beers a year. So the point of these really extreme cases is that it's not how much you use, it's not what you use, it's how it affects you that determines whether you're abusing the substance or not. So, what's going on here in the brain? So, there's a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. This is a reward center or a pleasure center in the brain, and when you put dopamine there, it feels good. There's lots of different ways to put dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Accomplishing something, exercise does it, helping other people makes it happen, winning at games, video games, people feel like they're accomplishing something. The brain doesn't realize that killing a bad guy in the video game is not the same as killing a bad guy or accomplishing something in the real world. You get a dopamine rush for accomplishing something. That's how they get addictive. Gambling, the same thing. People pull the lever on the slot machine, a whole bunch of coins come out. It feels so good. There's such a rush of dopamine, the nucleus accumbens, that they'll pull that lever 1,000 times in an effort to get that same feeling. Music can do it, sex can do it. Sex does a lot of other things in terms of pleasure, but the nucleus accumbens is active as well. And gratitude, a sense of gratitude, can stimulate the nucleus accumbens also. But the quickest way to do it is with drugs that directly, chemically stimulate the nucleus accumbens with dopamine. So this is a video of a mouse that has an electrode implanted in its nucleus accumbens. And every time he pushes that lever, it's going to stimulate the nucleus accumbens directly. Now initially he touches it by accident, then he feels good, and then he's going to start touching it repeatedly and compulsively. And eventually this rat, and this has been done in a lot of other rat studies as well, and other animals, will just do nothing but push that lever to get the nucleus accumbens stimulation. And this is essentially what's happening in drug abuse. This rat will push that lever until he dies. He'll push the lever instead of eating, instead of drinking, because it feels so good. And people will give up their jobs, give up their loved ones, give up their lives in order to get the good feeling that drugs deliver. This is what humans abusing substances are like. So again, every addictive drug, and some foods as well, can stimulate the nucleus accumbens with dopamine. I'm going to show several slides that show that same piece of data. So here we have the nucleus accumbens. All kinds of different drugs, through different mechanisms, stimulate the nucleus accumbens with dopamine. Now there's also a part of the brain that does the opposite. This is the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, and the anterior cingulate gyrus, the ACG. These parts of the brain in the frontal lobes help to control and inhibit some of our drives. They can inhibit the nucleus accumbens. So these parts of the brain are saying, you know, we could get in trouble, we could get a DUI, we probably shouldn't drink. But this part of the brain says it feels good, let's drink. Now, this is an interesting case, a guy named Phineas Gage. He was a railroad foreman, very successful, very well liked, calm, mild-mannered guy. One day in the 1850s, a tamping rod, and here he's holding that tamping rod, exploded. It was underneath it was on top of an explosive device that blew up and went through his head. The tamping rod went through his head and actually in and out, exited his brain and severed some of the connections between his frontal lobe and the rest of his brain. He had a dramatic personality change afterwards. He became an alcoholic. He was impulsive, he was violent, he was abusive, his family left him. He lost his job. Interestingly, he later partially recovered and was able to develop some ability to control his impulses, and he became a stagecoach driver in Chile. Just found that out recently. So we have this particularly dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that's involved in planning, controlling our impulses, working memory. It's a complicated system, but this is one of the main systems that keeps us from doing things that may harm us later on. It's involved in evaluating reward and risk. So another way to look at it is the devil here on Homer's shoulder is the nucleus accumbens saying, I want drugs, I want beer, feels good. And here on the angel's side is the prefrontal cortex saying, you better not do that, you're going to get in trouble. So again, this sort of conflict within the mind can be conceptualized in several different ways. If any of you saw the movie Inside Out, you had these characters inside the person's mind who represented different emotions, different aspects. Obviously here's anger. Lewis Black played this guy. Despair. Different parts of the person's personality sort of looking out through the person's eyes and reacting. Now, if the nucleus accumbens was one of these characters, it would be the one that every time they saw beer, every time it saw cocaine, said, do it, do it, do it. There wasn't a character like that, but there is a person or a system like that in our brains. It's the nucleus accumbens. I like to think of it more as a parliament of mind, whereas in a parliamentary system you have usually some centrist parties that are in charge and looking out for the welfare of the state, but you have some fringe parties that can occasionally take over and control the government. And that can be what happens with the mind. Fringe parties, in this case the nucleus accumbens, some of the other pleasure centers of the brain that say, hey, it feels good, and they can co-opt the more rational parts of the frontal lobe to say, maybe I can have one drink, maybe I can have one bump, I deserve it, find all kinds of reasons and rationalizations for using the drugs. That is really the goal of the nucleus accumbens. They can take over the mind briefly. Again, every drug that humans have ever discovered, all the addictive drugs, eventually put dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. That's what makes them addictive. So the most addictive drug that humans have ever discovered, anybody know what it is? There's only about 20 addictive substances we've ever discovered. The most addictive is nicotine. It's easier to get addicted to cigarette than it is to one shot of heroin. Heroin's number 2, then cocaine. Alcohol, cannabis, we'll talk about, does have some dependency, but nicotine is the worst or the easiest to get dependent to. It's because it causes a flood of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens very quickly, and then it wears off. So people that smoke cigarettes generally smoke 3 or 4 cigarettes first thing when they wake up in the morning to get their nicotine levels up. Then they smoke one about an hour every hour through the day because they need to get that dopamine rush. And one of the ways that the patch works is by keeping the nicotine level right around here. It keeps people out of the craving area for nicotine. Now, nicotine does a lot of different things. I'm not going to go into all the details, but because it has so many different ways of stimulating the nucleus accumbens, it's why it's so addictive, and it wears off quickly. That's the other reason why it's so addictive. Now, nicotine is a powerful dopamine releaser. It's also an antidepressant. There have been several studies that took people who were hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital and gave them a drink in a cup every morning that either had nicotine in it or an antidepressant. These were suicidally depressed patients. And after a month, both groups, the nicotine and the antidepressant group, were better to the same degree. So that suggests that nicotine has antidepressant properties. We knew that also because people who quit smoking have a 30% chance of becoming depressed in the first 6 months after quitting smoking. Nicotine is also a pesticide. They use it on some plants, particularly cotton in the South. And the way it works is it basically burns out the bug's brains with dopamine. It causes the bug's brains to flood with dopamine and burn out the cells that are producing dopamine and basically burn their brains out with dopamine. So that's how nicotine kills bugs. Now, there are different ways of getting nicotine in the body. The safest way is through the skin, through the patch. The next safest way is through the gum. This is not a good way to get nicotine, through the chewing tobacco, and this guy lost his jaw because of jaw cancer. The worst way to put nicotine in your body is through the lungs, through hot smoke. So I'm not going to say anything about e-cigarettes. They are probably safer. The studies as of this time that I'm giving this talk have not been completed yet, but I suspect they're going to show that e-cigarettes are safer than cigarettes and cigars. And make sure they would be. It makes sense that they would be, because there's a lot of nasty things in tobacco. This is really what people want. They just want the nicotine, but you get all this other stuff that comes with it, particularly in more processed tobacco, in cigarettes, and with filters, which also have some bad things in them. So the worst way to put nicotine in your body is through smoking, and the worst way to smoke is actually through low tar and nicotine cigarettes. Because people that smoke these cigarettes, I was involved in some of this research, people who smoke low tar nicotine cigarettes, they smoke more cigarettes a day, they take more puffs per cigarette, they take deeper puffs, they hold it in longer, they keep the smoke in longer to get their nicotine levels up, and as a result they get more smoke and more of the other nasty things. So low tar nicotine cigarettes and filtered cigarettes are actually worse for you. If you're going to smoke, the safest way to smoke is to roll your own, for several reasons. Basically, you don't smoke as many because you don't need to get the nicotine levels up. And you absorb a little bit of tobacco, a little bit of nicotine through the skin when you touch the tobacco. The tobacco is less processed, so it has less nasty stuff in it. It takes time to roll a cigarette, so you're not going to smoke as many for that reason, and it's cheaper. So for a number of reasons, rolling your own cigarette is the safest way. Although it's not safe, it's safer than any other way of smoking. Okay. Alcoholism. So this is the CAGE questionnaire. Primary care doctors, family medicine doctors are trained to ask these questions of people to try and detect alcoholism. They don't treat it, they just want to detect it. And CAGE stands for CAGE. C, have you ever felt you should cut down on drinking? A, have people annoyed you by criticizing your drinking? G, have you ever felt guilty about your drinking? And E, have you ever had a drink first thing in the morning? An eye-opener. Some people say just this, answering yes to this, means you have an alcohol problem. But you could substitute for drinking other things here: smoking, snorting, potato chips. And if you answered yes to 3 of these, probably have a substance abuse problem. Answered all 4, almost certainly. Now, why do people drink alcohol? Lots of different reasons. To look cool, to feel more relaxed, to join the party, have fun. Some people say they can't watch a sporting event without drinking beer, eating pizza, becoming drunk. But the most common reason I get from people is to feel numb. Alcohol may not be the answer to all questions, but it helps you to forget the questions. A lot of people say, I'd rather feel numb than feel bad, and drinking helps with that. Now, as we saw with nicotine has some therapeutic properties, some medicinal properties, and we'll see that just about every drug of abuse can be used medicinally, and alcohol was certainly used medicinally. In the early 1900s, they thought it was good for fevers because you could get a lot of calories through alcohol. It's pretty dense in terms of calories. And it was ideal, they said, for people suffering delirium or those who were unable to eat. And also, in the 1920, this guy said that it's a particularly efficacious depressant that helps with pain, discomfort here and there, diminishes those trivial worries, and he says it's the most valuable sedative and hypnotic drug we possess for infants and young children. Alcohol. Now, if you were in the Civil War and you were getting a limb cut off, you'd certainly want alcohol. If you had no other anesthetics, alcohol is a good one to make you numb to the pain of surgeries. Look at this cough syrup here. This was from the early 1900s. It's got alcohol in it, cannabis, chloroform, and morphine. Probably work pretty well. Most of these substances are not legal except for alcohol, but they were back then and were used medicinally. Now, alcohol does still have medicinal properties. A little bit of alcohol, particularly red wine, is better than none at all. 1 or 2 drinks a day is actually better for your heart than not drinking at all because of a substance called resveratrol. Now, you can get resveratrol by itself in pills at the health food store, but even from drinking, the amount of benefit that people get, particularly women, the heart benefit is tiny compared to the damage that alcohol causes. For men, the heart benefit is a little bit greater, but still the damage far outweighs the benefits. Now, a lot of people I've talked to, and I've asked if they drink, they'll say, no, I don't drink, doc. And then I'll ask them later on, and they'll say, well, I do drink beer, but I don't drink. Some people don't think beer is drinking, that only vodka or hard liquor is drinking, but it's the same. You can see here whether we're talking about light beer, regular beer, wine, sparkling wine, or spirits, hard liquor, it's all the same, 10 grams of alcohol, because the volume, the percentage of alcohol is low, but the volume is so much greater that people get 10 grams of alcohol whether they get a mixed drink or a light beer. And it doesn't take much alcohol to get over the legal limit, which is 0.08 for driving in this country. 3 drinks in an hour for a 140-pound person will put you over the legal limit. A 6-pack in an hour will put anybody, no matter what weight, over the legal limit. Now, you know, when you get your blood drawn, they rub alcohol on your skin first before they draw the blood or before they start an IV. Why is that? Because alcohol is toxic to germs and bacteria, and it's actually toxic to every cell in the body. You give it enough time, it will kill any organic life form. And the cells in the body, particularly the liver, which is the first place that sees alcohol when it comes out of the stomach, tries to detoxify it. So the liver gets usually hit with alcohol first and gets affected by it first. But all the other organs, the lungs, the muscles, the stomach can get ulcers, the testes, the gonads, the bones, every part of the body can be affected and eventually be made toxic by alcohol. And the brain is the most dangerous one because you can get a number of psychiatric conditions from alcohol, including alcoholic hallucinosis. That's where people actually hallucinate from chronic drinking. Depression, anxiety, see this a lot, chronic alcoholics. Aggression, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Dementia, vitamin deficiency, particularly thiamine and folate. Now here's a normal 43-year-old brain. Here's an alcoholic 43-year-old brain. You see there's holes here. Brain cells have actually been killed. This person is only 43 years old and has lost big chunks of the brain because alcohol killed it. So in terms of alcohol and violence, the majority of people in jail committed their crime while under the influence of alcohol. And incidents of violence increase on the weekend because people are drinking more on the weekend, so there's more violence on the weekend, and there's more violence as the night goes on directly related to the increase in alcohol consumption. So there's no question that alcohol and violence are very intimately connected. Here's a cure for drunks from the 1890s, tawny cocaine port. So just substitute cocaine for alcohol. So here's stimulant abuse, but this progression is true for just about any drug of abuse. You start off using it, it feels good. The cells that got stimulated with dopamine now say, hey, where's my dopamine? Give me some more dopamine. People use it again. Some people have this periods of reverse tolerance where they become very sensitive to the drug or the drink for a period of time. Say, hey, for a while there, one beer was getting me drunk, and now I have to drink a whole six-pack. So that's usually short-lived, maybe a week or two. Then people get withdrawal. They get compulsive in their use, and eventually they can burn out some of these dopamine-producing cells. Now, we see that particularly with methamphetamine. Here's a normal nucleus accumbens. Here's a nucleus accumbens in a methamphetamine abuser. He's damaged his nucleus accumbens, and the danger here is that this person is going to have difficulty feeling pleasure, because things that normally give this person pleasure, this person doesn't have the cells to experience that pleasure. So this person is going to be even more vulnerable to going back to methamphetamine, because at least he gets some pleasure there by goosing these cells directly, even while he's killing them. Now, we talked mostly about dopamine. I'm just going to say a few words about serotonin. So serotonin is another neurotransmitter that's involved with some other drugs that generally are not drugs of abuse, particularly the hallucinogens, LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline. Now, LSD is an amazing drug. It looks a little like serotonin, and it can be potent at only 100 micrograms. Very small amounts of LSD is all that's necessary to start a trip, and it leaves the body completely within an hour. So whatever LSD triggers, it starts it and it leaves it, and then it goes on its own. You can also get the same tripping effect from hyperventilation, sleep deprivation, chanting, other ways most cultures have found of entering that sort of tripping state. But drugs are a very quick and easy way to do it. MDMA, also known as ecstasy or Molly, stands for methylene dioxymethamphetamine. It causes a flood, actually the brain to release all of its dopamine at once, and then that produces, I guess, a feeling of ecstasy for a few hours, and then people usually feel depressed the next couple of days because their brain has no more serotonin. It takes a while to make more serotonin. Okay, I drink to forget about my painkiller addiction. So, painkillers. So, opiate painkillers, whether we're talking about oxycodone, OxyContin, morphine, hydrocodone, Dilaudid, methadone, heroin, codeine, buprenorphine, there's several others. There are three opiate receptors in the brain, kappa, delta, and mu, and they all inhibit GABA release and stimulate dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens. The opiates are used quite commonly for pain. They work really well. They're the strongest pain medications we have. But the effects depend on a number of things. And this is true for other drugs as well, what the state of mind is when people use it. This is even true for alcohol. Opiates, in terms of what you mix them with, and alcohol also, and other drugs, the mixing, and whether you're a new user or an experienced user has a big effect on what people experience, and in terms of their toxicity as well. An experienced user of heroin may be able to handle a whole syringe full of heroin, but a new user may kill them. Now, the prescriptions for hydrocodone and oxycodone have gone up quite a bit in the last 10 years, and people are abusing these drugs more. 5.5% of high school seniors have used cough medicine to get high in the last year. 3 out of 4 prescription drug deaths are due to narcotic pain medications, and most people are getting it from a friend or a relative. They're not getting it prescribed. 17% are getting them prescribed, but the rest of them are getting it from friends or relatives, or stealing it, or from the internet. Now, national overdose deaths have kind of plateaued, but deaths from cocaine have actually gone down, and deaths from heroin have gone way up. The heroin that's available now is much more potent, but also the prescription medications, a lot of deaths from prescription opiate medications. Very, very dangerous drugs, but also very useful. Okay, I'm going to spend a significant amount of time here talking about cannabis because I get asked about it all the time. The cannabis plant, the hemp plant, has more uses than any other plant by far than humans have ever discovered. I would even go so far as to say that the hemp plant, the cannabis plant, is the botanical world's greatest gift to humanity. It can be used for so many things. For food, birds, if you give them seed with multiple different types of seed, including hemp, they will particularly pick out the hemp seeds. I guess they taste better, they've got more protein. Cannabis can be used in construction, in textiles, in plastics, in paper, food, medicines, livestock bedding. It has so many different uses. Now, we've known about it as it's a psychoactive ingredient for a long time. Humans have for thousands of years. The first time it was ever talked about for medicinal purposes was in the 1830s at a British journal in Calcutta, talking about using it for pain, vomiting, convulsions, and spasticity. And then, pardon me, it was available in this country legally up until 1942. And here's what's used for the same things: insomnia, headaches, anorexia, sexual dysfunction, pain, whooping cough, which we don't have anymore due to vaccines, and asthma. Now, here is the tincture of cannabis sativa that was available in the early 1900s. And here's its stamp for growing marijuana. Here's cocaine tooth drops. Again, the point being that drugs we think of as addictive also have medicinal uses. So the rise of recreational use of marijuana really started after World War II and really exploded in the 60s. It came up from Mexico as well as from jazz musicians were using it, and it spread to college campuses and eventually the entire society. People like the high. I guess it causes a sense of slowed time, increased body awareness. Some people like the sleepiness, the reduced focus. The loss of memory can help people feel like they're more in the now when they're not laying down memory. And there's three different types of marijuana, medical marijuanas, if you will. There's the endocannabinoids that our brain is producing. These are a neurotransmitter called anandamide, ananda from the Sanskrit word for ecstasy. Phytocannabinoids, this is what people are smoking and eating from the plants, mostly THC and CBD. We'll talk about those. And synthetic cannabinoids, these are made in laboratories and turned into different pills. Now, anandamide is present in very, very small quantities in the human brain. There is anandamide in nature, and there's anandamide in chocolate. And you can get the same amount of anandamide in chocolate as there is THC in a joint. You can get as high from eating chocolate as you can from smoking a joint. All you got to do is eat 60 pounds of chocolate. You may have some other problems, though, from that. So there are at least 70 different psychoactive ingredients in cannabis. This is the one that's being bred for, the delta-9 THC. This is generally what gets people high, but there's 9 different types of delta-9 THC, 2 different types of delta-8, 7 different types of CBD. This is mostly the medicinal part of marijuana, but look at all these other different things. We are just starting. Just in the last couple of months, I heard they're starting to do research on terpenoids and flavonoids. We're just beginning to understand all the different chemicals in cannabis. Now, most of the health effects from cannabis come from CBD, as I mentioned. Here's CBD. Almost all the health benefits come from CBD. THC can help with some pain relief, perhaps, maybe inflammatory, but clearly the vast majority of the medicinal benefits come from the CBD. Now, in the 70s and 80s, marijuana that was available on the street had 3-4%, maybe 5% THC if it was really strong stuff. The sensimelia, which means the unfertilized bud from the female plant. The people got Maui Wowie or Thai stick back then. It was strong stuff. Now look, now we're getting up to 12-15%. This is in the 2009. This is what they bred for. This is a victory for selective breeding for the delta-9 THC. And this is from a dispensary online. I took this picture. Here is a type of sativa marijuana that is 24% THC. So dramatically different than the 3 or 4% THC that we saw in the 70s and 80s. And as you can see, the sativa blends are going to have a lot more THC. People use marijuana for different reasons. Medical users, they just want symptom relief. Recreational users want to get high. And medical users who've never gotten high before, who've never smoked marijuana before, don't necessarily like the high. Former recreational users obviously don't mind. Euphoria may help with any symptoms. If you feel good, it's going to help with any symptom you have. And this is prescribed in a strange way. Smoke as much as you need. It's rare that doctors would say, take as much of this medicine as you need. Here's a doctor saying, I'm prescribing medical marijuana, smoke 2 joints, and try to remember to call me in the morning. So there is some memory effects with marijuana. That's part of the high, as I mentioned, the impairment of short-term memory. And there's also this sense of time dilation. You ask somebody under the influence of THC how much time has gone by, and they grossly overestimate. It's been an hour, but maybe it's only been 15 minutes. So there's several hypotheses that we worry about in psychiatry. Can cannabis cause schizophrenia? Can it make psychosis? Can it make psychosis worse? And is it more likely in schizophrenic? So we're going to look at each of these very quickly here. But first I have to define psychosis. What is psychosis? Gross impairment in reality testing, out of touch with reality, as evidenced by delusions. Those are fixed false beliefs. Hallucinations, those are misperceptions. Disorganized speech or behavior. and catatonia, which is being awake and unresponsive. Now, it's mostly delusions and hallucinations that we're going to see from the delta-9 THC. But first, does cannabis cause schizophrenia? The answer is really no, and this is data from Australia, but we could use many, many countries where the use of cannabis went up dramatically in the last 40 years, but the incidence of schizophrenia remained unchanged at 1% of the population throughout human cultures and probably throughout human history. 1% of us have schizophrenia. But it doesn't seem like cannabis made that any worse. That's good news. But does cannabis cause psychosis? This is older data now. We're talking in 1996 when they had the less potent marijuana, and already 15% of people are having hallucinations and paranoia. 22% are having panic attacks. 7 years later, the number of reporting paranoia has gone up to 51%, and hallucinations have gone up to 20%. I don't have more recent data on this. I'll show you some other studies that are kind of frightening. But yes, cannabis can cause psychosis. There's clearly that people who use marijuana more are more likely to have psychosis. I've got some more data to show you that, and it can make psychosis worse. People who use marijuana heavily are much more likely to be hospitalized for psychosis, and people who already have schizophrenia, much higher rates of relapse if they smoke marijuana. So yes, it can cause psychosis, it can make psychosis worse, and the younger people are, when they start smoking marijuana, the worse it is. In terms of academic problems, medical problems, hospitalization, 5 times greater risk of people who smoke marijuana before 12th grade than people who waited till later. People who start smoking after age 18 have no increased rate of mental illness. So this is encouraging. If people wait later, it seems to be much less risky. And again, as I said, super strong cannabis responsible for 1/4 of new psychosis cases. So this stuff they call skunk, this sativa, high THC blends are causing a lot of psychosis that we didn't see 15, 20 years ago. We didn't see this illness. Didn't exist 15 years ago. Cannabinoid-induced acute and persistent psychosis. People who become psychotic, hearing voices, usually it's paranoia, but sometimes hearing voices. It goes away, but it can continue even after people stop smoking. But it may take weeks to go away, and it comes back every time they use, and some of these people later get diagnosed with schizophrenia. They probably already were going to get schizophrenia, but this may have made it come on sooner. And again, the earlier people use, and the more people use marijuana, the higher the risk of being diagnosed with a psychotic disorder. So the high THC marijuana user has a 24% chance of having a psychotic disorder. The daily high THC use is the highest risk. It's the THC and the use of it that seems to do it. And there is such a thing as dependence. Now, it seems to be most at risk, again, for young people to become dependent on marijuana. People who start smoking after age 25 apparently have zero risk, which is hard to believe, zero risk of becoming addicted, and there's a risk of becoming addicted or using these other dangerous drugs as well. The symptoms of marijuana withdrawal are usually irritability, insomnia, anorexia, restlessness, aggressivity. And again, the more people use, the more likely they are to have a withdrawal syndrome. People that use infrequently, maybe once a week or once a month, are not at risk for this. But the daily users, heavy daily users, are at risk for the symptoms of marijuana withdrawal. There are systems throughout the body that are affected by our THC receptors that are called the CB receptors, cannabinoid receptors, cannabinoid 1 and 2. We're just starting to crack this system. It's amazing. It's ubiquitous. It's all through the body and affects all these different organ systems, the nervous system, the immune system, the reproductive system. There are 2 types of receptors for cannabis, CB1 and CB2. The CB1 receptors are mostly involved in the brain with mood and cognition and concentration and so on, and appetite regulation to an extent, and there's some in the gut. And then there's the CB2, cannabinoid 2 receptor. It's mostly in the rest of the body, involved in digestion and defense and inflammation. And there are some prescription cannabis drugs available. Marinol is mostly synthetic THC. I prescribed it for AIDS patients who had anorexia, loss of appetite, and it seemed to help. Cancer patients also can help with nausea. Sesamet is similar. I haven't prescribed it, but it works the same way, lasts a little bit longer. This one I thought was going to be out a long time ago, but it has not yet come out. It is Sativex. It's a spray that you spray in the mouth. It's mostly THC, but some CBD as well. They're going to have it be indicated for multiple sclerosis, spasticity, and cancer pain. It's been being studied for a long time. I don't know what's taking so long. But lots of medications are going to come from cannabis. We are going to have probably a whole field of pharmacology that's going to come from all the different medicinal components of cannabis in terms of anti-nausea, pain relief, appetite modulators, anti-cancer, antipsychotic. As I said, it can cause psychosis, but some of the components may actually treat psychosis. So multiple different things in this huge chemical slew that is cannabis. This is an ad I took from the New England Journal of Medicine in 2001 for this new drug, a new frontier for cardiometabolic risk reduction. What was this? This was from the Sanofi Aventis lab. They came up with a compound called rimonabant. I was researching it. It's an endocannabinoid receptor antagonist, so it blocks the marijuana receptors. It's the anti-marijuana, if you will. And what does it do? Well, it causes dramatic weight loss, right? People who smoke marijuana have an increase in appetite. People who block the marijuana receptors have a loss of appetite and significant weight loss. Along with the good HDLs goes up, the bad triglycerides go down, doubles the chances of quitting smoking. We have nothing like this that doubles the chances of quitting smoking. So what happened? It was in phase 3 trials by the FDA, and 4 patients out of 1,500 committed suicide. That's a huge number. The normal rate of suicide is about 2 per 100,000. This is 4 in 1,500. Huge number of suicides. The FDA said, that's it. You can't sell this. It used to be available on the internet for a while afterwards, and was still available in Europe, and then they said, we're not selling it either. And so it's off the market. But one of the interesting things that I think this may show is that here's people with no past psychiatric history who became so depressed that they committed suicide when their cannabinoid receptors got blocked. So this is some evidence that if you stimulate those receptors, maybe you get an antidepressant effect, because blocking them causes severe depression. Okay, so the summary about cannabis. More medicinal uses than any plant humans have ever discovered. That's clear. The current strains are many times more potent than they were previously because of this delta-9 THC, which is what they bred it for, because this is where the high comes from, but this is what's also causing psychosis that we didn't see 20 years ago, because the delta-9 THC content is so much greater than it used to be. The earlier people start smoking, the more problems they have with addiction, mental illness. It does not cause schizophrenia, thank goodness. And I tend to tell people it's a wild card. Maybe this is going to help you, maybe it's going to make your psychosis worse, probably going to make it worse, but maybe it's going to make it better. Maybe it can help your depression, maybe it's going to make it better. It's a wild card. I can't predict. My recommendation to people who are having psychiatric illness right now is do not smoke marijuana, because you don't know what it's going to do. Maybe it will help you. I don't know. Maybe it's going to hurt you. It's too big a risk. We'll be able to say things a little more safely in the future. Probably the CBD, if we get pure CBD, it's probably a lot safer, much less likely to cause problems. A couple more things here. Spice. I used to talk about this a lot more 10 years ago. Fortunately, I hardly see this anymore. These were legal synthetic cannabinoids that were available in gas stations and smoke shops, and I saw a lot of people in the psychiatric hospital because of using this stuff. It has a very high concentration of this delta-9 THC, which is the one that causes psychosis, and we saw a lot of psychosis. Goes by other names, bath salts, ivory wave. Most people call them bath salts. They have nothing to do with the bath. I don't know why they got that name. But I've seen people have heart attacks, seizures, and psychosis that may last for even up to a week, and none of my medications touched them. So fortunately, this is rare now, but it was a big problem 10 years ago. Okay, last thing, how do we treat substance abuse? Well, vast majority of substance abuse treatment occurs in this country in self-help groups, 12-step groups mostly, which I'll talk about. Outpatient, inpatient rehab, hospitals, private doctor's offices, and some people don't stop using until they go to jail. That's the only way to get them to stop using it. And some people even continue to use in jail. 12-step treatment is the most common treatment for substance abuse in this country. It was started in the 30s by Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. Bill Wilson saw Carl Jung for his alcohol problem, and Jung said, I can't help you. Therapy is not going to help you. You've got a spiritual problem. So Bill Wilson went to Oxford in England and found that they were researching the conversion experience, and he studied these. They said there were 12 stages of people converting to a religion, and he took those 12 steps and made them the 12 steps of AA treatment. Promoted the idea that it's a disease and an allergy. Prior to that, people thought that alcoholics were just weak-willed or evil. People meet as a group anonymously to talk about their experiences. They don't have to use God. They do talk about a higher power. Sponsors are available 24/7 to prevent relapse. They promote complete abstinence, not one drop of alcohol, and it can be used for lots of different drugs, for eating disorders, for sexual addiction. Here are the 12 steps. the original 12 steps. It does use God, but you can just substitute higher power. It could be a part of the self, doesn't have to be a spiritual being. But the interesting paradox I've always been intrigued by is step number 1. We admitted we were powerless. So somehow admitting that you're powerless gives you some kind of power. It's interesting. You surrender the power to something greater than you, and that gives you some power. It's very interesting. But you can see as you move through these steps here that you can see where this is part of a conversion experience. Make amends, ask to forgive our shortcomings, take a personal inventory, prayer, meditation, and then helping other people. That's the 12th step. The 13th step, everybody heard of 13 stepping. That's when people use the 12-step groups to pick up, usually men picking up women they think are going to be vulnerable. So 13 stepping, not a good idea. The second major model for substance abuse treatment is harm reduction. And this model says, maybe we can't stop you from drinking. A lot of people say, forget it, I'm not doing AA because I'm not going to stop drinking. Well, maybe we can get you to do it in a safer way. So instead of drinking every day, maybe we can get you to drink on the weekends or only at night and not drive and not have anybody in the car and not make any big decisions when you're drinking. And drink in a safer way. Even more striking is how this can be used for people who are using injectable drugs. Say, look, we can't stop you from shooting drugs, but at least use clean needles so that the biggest risk from shooting drugs, which is the dirty needles, can be eliminated. I've often thought of the harm reduction model when I've seen some videos like this, which you may have seen, of a dog being able to resist eating a treat. So this dog is going to get treats put on its nose, multiple treats put on its nose. This is this dog's favorite thing to eat, and yet he's able to refrain from eating it. So I thought, well, look, if a dog can do this, why can't a person do this? Why can't a person refrain from drinking a beer or drinking alcohol or snorting cocaine when it's right in front of him? And I think part of the answer is this dog is going to get to eat those treats at the end. If you said, here's a bottle of beer, but don't drink it, that's not what we're asking the dog to do here. That's much harder. But this may be one of the ways to use harm reduction is to say, okay, are you going to drink? Use it as a treat. Get your work done first. Get everything you need to do done first, and then use it as a reward instead of just doing it because you feel like it. And that would be similar to what's happening with this dog here. Okay, ask your doctor if another damn pill is right for you. Do we have pills for substance abuse? Kind of. We have for alcohol and abuse. This is the only drug we have, a drug that makes you sick if you use it. So if you take antabuse and you drink, alcohol will get converted into acetaldehyde, and instead of getting converted into acetic acid, the antabuse will block that. The acetaldehyde will build up, and it will cause a very bad physical reaction. It's not dangerous, but it feels terrible. Flushing, headache, nausea, and vomiting, very uncomfortable. So people usually don't do that more than once on antabuse. It's good for what we call early sobriety, so that people don't drink when they first stop drinking because they don't want to get sick. These other ones are used for the craving. Camprol you can give while people are still drinking. That's the only one. The rest of these you have to wait till they stop drinking, and they can help with craving. For nicotine, we can substitute the gum and the patch for the smoking, and these two, Wellbutrin and Chantix, are used for the craving. Chantix has the risk of causing suicidal ideation too, which is interesting. The opiates, we can give substitutes, again, methadone and buprenorphine, Suboxone, instead of the heroin that people are using. These are safer, they're oral. And we can use clonidine and benzodiazepines for the withdrawal. Now, the withdrawal from opiates is uncomfortable, but it's not toxic. But the withdrawal from alcohol can be fatal. That's the only one that can have a fatal withdrawal syndrome, called the DTs. Okay, last slide, then we'll stop. So this is the future of psychiatry, is genetic testing. We are finding some genes that show that people who have it are either highly vulnerable to opiate dependence or dependence on non-opioid drugs. So we'll be able to tell by looking at people's genes if they're at risk for substance abuse and may be able to intervene early, or at least the person may know they should stay away from these drugs that are likely to get them into trouble. Okay, thank you very much. I hope this was helpful.